Which is going to get done first, a contract for Nylander or a trade for Carlson after what you're kind of reporting today?
Well, I for a long time I didn't like to make that kind of a wager. I've really tried to be careful with the Carlson. There were some points during the season. It's funny. I got a call today. It was from a guy in the league, and he says, "Okay, you guys all thought Carlson was getting traded at the deadline, and it didn't happen. And there were reports that he was close to getting traded a couple of months ago, and it didn't happen. And now you again today." Like he said to me, this guy's like an assistant general manager. He goes, "Why am I going to believe you when it didn't happen the previous times?" And I understand his skepticism, and I understand the skepticism of other people out there. I've really tried to be careful with the Carlson because, for one thing, I think it's unfair to him, it's unfair to the organization, it's unfair to the team's fans. Like you reach a point where it's like, oh, I feel badly for all these people already. All I know is that it has legitimately percolated in the past couple of days. And, I mentioned, Vancouver in there. I think they stepped in to see if there was a fit. I saw Ian McIntyre, who I think is really plugged in with the Canucks, said he thinks it was more of a searching mission. The one thing I would say about Vancouver is, they were in on PK Subban, and they had a chance to get that one done until they knew they weren't getting Dubois. They made a plan internally to pitch Tavares. They didn't get a seat at the table. It's not out of the realm of possibility for me, a team that has kind of been in on these players, and why wouldn't you be in on Erik Karlsson, that they would maybe fish and take a look. But, I still think it's probably the more likely suspects are probably some of the ones we've seen, like Dallas, San Jose, maybe Vegas. I do think Dallas is pretty legitimate in there. But all I can say, Mike, is that I wouldn't have done it today if I didn't have intel that said, there's a legitimate chance here, but I'm not going to come on and say it's 100% going to happen. I think we all know that it's been tricky throughout this process.
Well, a reminder that, Feed, you were the first guy to report something was amiss in Ottawa way, way, way back when as far as being plugged in. And Michael and I were just talking. As it got to the point, though, where it's really accepted and understood, Erik Karlsson just can't go to training camp. I mean, this isn't like Matt Duchene last year in Colorado, that it's just business, that it's just too raw.
I think there is something to that, and I think also you remember a few years ago when they had Danny Heatley, they waited until he showed up at training camp, and they saw how unhappy he was, and they went back and they pulled the trigger. And I just don't think they want to do that again. Pierre Dorion was in the organization, I believe, when that happened. But I think Ottawa's kind of been through that before, and they're kind of like, we don't want that. And I just also think that as another GM said to me today, he says sometimes we like to do business when none of you guys are working, and I think there is a little bit of that. Like it's getting close, and a lot of the reporters are on vacation, and let's just see if we can get something going while the heat's a little bit off.
Yeah, it is tricky though, Freach, because part of me thinks, okay, you got to trade him now before going into camp because you got Brady Tkachuk there, and I think the last thing you want is to bring a young guy into a toxic environment. The other part of me says if Ottawa keeps him to the deadline, you might be able to fetch a better deal. That deal that existed last year with Tampa, granted, there's 1 year less of it.
Another year.
Yeah. But like I wonder, is it better? Like, are they going to get a better return now or at the deadline? And I guess there's no way of really knowing that. But can you really balance that against just kind of keeping him around where he doesn't want to be there? Obviously, both sides need to move on, but you also have to get the greatest deal here. You can't just rush it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, the one thing I do understand is I think quietly, they've known what the market is for a long time. And look, it was such a hard year last year in Ottawa. There's so much about this situation, Mike, that is different. Like, sometimes I think we all look at the sport like a bit of a textbook, like we're in a classroom. Like this is what the textbook says. It's like taking economics in school versus going out and having like a real job. You look at the textbook in university or in high school, and okay, this is your supply, this is your demand, and this is how you figure out what you do from here. And to us, it makes a lot of sense to simply say, okay, let's do this and let's wait to this. But then you have the real world implications. And, there's a lot of real world implications in Ottawa. They're just coming off a really difficult year. I think they are really trying as much as they can to turn the page. And I don't think that's a negative shot at Erik Karlsson or anything like that. I do think if the ownership situation was different, I think they would have a much better opportunity to re-sign him. I think there's a lot of Erik Karlsson that would like to stay in Ottawa, just not under this current ownership situation. And, I just think that when you go through the kind of year you had last year, I understand that you make decisions that are not in the textbook.